We're looking into the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 3, and the article reads as follows. The state parties to the present covenant undertake to ensure the equal right of men and women to the enjoyment of all civil and political rights set forth in the present covenant. If you look a little bit closer at this article of law, right, we see the subject or player that is being brought forth here is men and women. That's the designation of the subject or the player. I'm talking about the principles of fundamental justice here. And here in Article 16 of the Iccpr, it reads as follows. Everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So let's look at that article of law a little deeper. It starts off with showing us the subject and player, which is titled or designated everyone. So that word, that term, that designation is inclusive of everyone. Everyone can fit into this capacity, and everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So, what are we seeing so far? We are seeing that the subject, the player, everyone, has a right. A right doesn't produce an obligation. A right gives you an entitlement. So far, this law is telling us that everyone has an entitlement. And we further see that this entitlement that everyone has the right to is recognition everywhere as a person before the law. That's the entitlement that everyone holds. That's the entitlement that everyone is allowed. Walk this down slowly. Everyone, including a man or a woman, a human being, shall have the right, not the obligation, but an entitlement, an ability to recognition, to be recognized everywhere before the law as a person. So, this article of law is saying the man or the woman, the human being, is entitled to recognition before the law. So, the operation of law, the principle of justice that this article of law is bringing forth, is saying that a man or a woman is entitled to be recognized before the law as a man or a woman under their full legal capacity. That's the entitlement that men and women possess. They do not have to take separate or different recognition before the law. They do not have to enter into statutory recognition, such as driver, taxpayer, student, whatever the recognition may be. The law is saying that we are entitled to stay in our natural capacity and that our government must recognize us under that natural capacity. This puts an obligation upon our countries, upon our domestic governments, to recognize us under our full legal capacity. Therefore, they have to create an avenue in law. They have to create a recognition in law that lines up with this international obligation. So, what transpired in the law is they created a personhood designated natural personhood. And then they exclusively gave the natural personhood to the man or the woman, meaning that anyone who stands under their natural personhood must be automatically recognized by the law as standing in their capacity as a man or a woman without any additional obligations to statutory law, without any additional impositions placed against or upon the man or the woman. In this capacity, there are no automatic obligations placed upon you or working against you towards statutory law. meaning that you're not born with an obligation to follow statutory law, to submit yourself to statutory law, and to do what the government is trying to force you to do. This is what is considered an imposition. It's an additional obligation added to you. And these additional obligations, they come from statutory law. For example, if the government tries to force you to play the role, to take recognition as a taxpayer, as that person before the law, well, they are forcing you into that recognition, and they are adding additional duties to you that your natural person, that you as a man or a woman do not have the responsibility to. And they are again are forcing you into that recognition. Therefore, they are breaching Article 16, because Article 16 does not give any government the power to force you into a recognition before the law. The article of law says you have the right, and a right is an entitlement. You cannot be forced. But what the government does is it creates domestic statutory law and then tries to force that law upon you. And in doing so, they change your recognition before the law. They remove your recognition as the man or the woman, and they return a recognition to you as taxpayer. And in returning this recognition to you, they add additional obligations to you. They add additional duties to you, but you are not under obligation to accept. The natural person is not something that's exterior to the man or the woman. The natural person is simply the designation that forces law to recognize you specifically as a man or a woman with all your natural absolute rights intact, not limited and not abridged. So it is very important that you learn to take this recognition, because the law wants to change this recognition forcefully against you. And they want to recognize you as a driver, as a student, as a hunter, as a taxpayer, as a property owner, because all these recognitions in law are statutory recognitions. And they try to add duties and obligations upon you through these recognitions. But if you learn how to stand under your full legal capacity as a man or a woman before the law and force them to recognize your natural personhood, they lose the authority to place these impositions upon you. Because again, under your natural person, which recognizes you as a man or a woman in your natural state, you have no legal obligation to these subsequent duties. In Article 5 of the International Covenant, it reads as follows: nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person. So there's three subjects that are mentioned: no state, which means no government power, no group or person has any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms recognized herein, or at their limitation to a greater extent than is provided for in the present covenant. The term person here means any agent, any government agent that is operating on behalf of the government. This puts them under the accountability, because they say, I'm coming to you and I'm an agent of the government. Great, I acknowledge that. But let me tell you, you are under the obligation, right, not to take any activity or perform any act against me that tries to destroy my fundamental rights, my absolute rights. And if you do, then you are against international law. You are against human rights. and your actions are illegal. So, as a man or a woman, you have the right to be recognized before them. You have the right to be recognized in the law as a natural person. And that recognition entitles you to no additional duties, no additional impositions against you. But if the state party, if the domestic party comes by and now tries to change your recognition in the law and force you to be recognized as a statutory creature before them, such as taxpayer or driver or student, then they are engaged in activity and they are taking actions aimed at the destruction of your right. Because your right says you can be recognized as a man or a woman before the law, and that's your choice. But by trying to force you into statutory recognition, they are attempting and they are limiting and abridging your right. That action or interaction with you, whether it be with a physical agent or a piece of paper you receive in the mail, where the government is attempting to change your status before them, to force you into recognition as another type of person before the law, let's say taxpayer. That action is against your rights, and that action is aimed at the destruction of your right. And Article 5 says that nothing in the present covenant allows them to do this. And if they do this, then they're actually breaching the principle of justice. They're going against the rule of law. A right is described as follows: it is a power, a privilege, or immunity secured to a person by law. So, as a natural person, as a man or a woman, you have immunity secured to you. You have a power secured to you. And what is that power? And what is that immunity? Well, that you cannot be forced out of that recognition, that nobody can come by and change your recognition and force a change in your recognition in order for you to take on additional duties or impositions. So when a person comes by who represents the government and they try to add a duty of taxation against you, or they try to add an obligation of a statutory power against you, as your natural personhood affords you, as your recognition as a man or woman before the law affords you, you have immunity. You have a power to say, no, you cannot do this to me. You cannot force me into recognition as a statutory person and take me out of my natural personhood unless I agree. In prior videos, I've already discussed the fact that if there's a right, then that right creates an obligation upon a subsequent party. And here, the right is defined as a legally enforceable claim that another will do or will not do a given act, a recognized and protected interest, the violation of which is wrong, a breach of duty. So, your legally enforceable right as a man or a woman is that the state party, the domestic law, will not force recognition upon you under any other personhood. That is their corresponding obligation to you because you have a right. Again, I'm not talking about what they are actually doing. I understand what's transpiring. But what I'm trying to show you and teach you is the principle of justice, the rule of law that many are not aware of. And that principle of justice is just as I explained in this video today.